live. Welcome, mystery and thriller fans. I'm your on-air host, Sara DiVello, and this is my co-host, Pharoah DiVello. We are so excited to host author Nicholas Meyer here to give us the scoop on his brand new book, The Return of the Pharaoh. Nicholas, welcome to Mystery and Thriller Mavens. Tell us about this book.
Well, this is a novel about Sherlock Holmes in Egypt in 1911 on the trail of a missing English nobleman who has gone archaeology wild, as many rich people, Americans and Brits, and they started by wintering in Egypt for their health because of the dry climate, or in some cases for certain other recreational activities. This is a family show. We don't have to go into it. They all got bitten by the Egyptology bug. They all started searching for buried loot. Some of them were responsible and archaeologically sophisticated, and others were plunderers. I think you know about the Elgin marbles, and Lord Elgin, grabbed them off the ground where he said they were not being cared for. But places like Greece and Egypt felt that their patrimony was being looted, which in many cases it was. In any case, this missing nobleman he had financial problems which he thought he could resolve by finding Egyptian treasure, and now no one can find him, so his wife has hired Holmes to go to Egypt to look.
Ooh, well, I love everything I'm hearing. I love historical fiction. I love Egypt. I love Sherlock and Holmes, and I am excited to get into the details of this book. But first, I just want to welcome all of our friends who are watching tonight. Welcome, Mystery and Thriller fam. If you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching on YouTube, Murder by the Books channels, my channels, wherever you're watching from, you're in the right place, and we're going to get the skinny about The Return of the Pharaoh. If you've been here before, you know the drill. This is your time. Every Monday, I give you my 2 hand-picked featured authors, and you get to ask them anything. So get the questions going in the comments. You can ask Nicholas about his writing process, about Holmes, about Watson, about Egypt, about LA. He lives in LA. About New York. He's from New York. Whatever you are wondering, get it going in the comments, and we will get those questions right over to him. Welcome, Susan. Welcome, Tom. Welcome, Mark. Welcome, Alan. Welcome, everyone. Mark is saying greetings. Okay, Mark, you're clearly in the right place because your profile picture is Holmes himself. Fantastic. I love it. Welcome, Andrea. Great to have you here. Now, Nicholas, let's talk about what it's like for you as an author to write a Holmes and Watson book. Is the pressure of writing a book of such beloved, infamous, famous characters, is it crushing? Do you ever sit there at your desk just completely frozen, or is it inspiring? It's crushing.
I get the same question about my Star Trek movies all the time. Did you, were you inhibited? And in the case of Star Trek, is I had never seen Star Trek, so I guess I wasn't inhibited. In the case of Holmes, I was given those books, the 60 stories in one volume by my dad when I think I was about 11. And I gobbled them all up. And then I got very blue when they ended. I never really liked most of the Sherlock Holmes movies. And I always thought that Watson in particular was always be portrayed as a kind of a jerk. And I never understood why a genius hangs out with a jerk, although I'm sure some have. But I wrote The 7% Solution, which was my first Holmes book, as a kind of corrective to all those campy movies. And I don't think I was inhibited. I think rather egomaniacally, I felt that I was the only person who understood what these things should really be and how Holmes and Watson should really be written. And it wasn't Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce. It was something else. And so I appointed myself as the sort of the keeper of the flame or something. And maybe I'm not, but that's what I told myself at the time. And being inhibited didn't really enter into it. I thought I had the pass key to how to do this.
So, as the keeper of the flame, the self-appointed keeper of the flame, do you feel that the stories flow through you? Do you hear their voices? Do you ever argue with them? I want you to go to Egypt. No, I don't want to go to Egypt. I want to stay in London. I mean, what is that like for you, Nicholas?
Well, when I began writing the 7% solution, which I guess has informed all the Holmes books that I've written since, I began by trying it on my then Smith Corona portable electric, which we can all remember from after the Civil War. And it wasn't coming out like Doyle. So I realized that Doyle wrote by hand. It wasn't that typewriters didn't exist. Mark Twain wrote Life on the Mississippi, the first book written on the typewriter. Um, but he wrote by hand. So I switched to writing by hand, and I kind of sort of found the rhythm of it. And then it just sort of came naturally to me. What's different about The Return of the Pharaoh, what's different about The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols or The Canary Trainer or the 7% Solution is that they don't take place in London. They don't take place in England. The West End Horror is the only one of my books that is meets Doyle on his own turf. The rest of the time, I found that my creative juices were loosened, if that's not a repulsive image, by taking him out of town, he's a fish out of Thames water, putting him in Paris, putting him in Russia, putting him in Egypt, as was suggested to me by my agent. And I thought, oh, great, I can combine Holmes with all those spear and sandal movies that I grew up loving. Valley of the Kings, Land of the Pharaohs, the Egyptians, Spartacus, what have you, that always interested me in Egypt, or even watching productions of Aida, which, as you know from the book, figures into the book. There's some people think Aida was written for the Alexandria Opera House to celebrate the opening of the Suez Canal, but I don't think that's true.
I did not know that. Mark would like to know what led you to write the 7% Solution, and how did you feel about the film adaptation compared to your book? Great question, Mark. Nicholas, give us the scoop.
Well, it's a two-part question, but I think I answered the first part. I was led to write the 7% Solution with an incredible dissatisfaction with principally movies, because there weren't a lot of other people writing Sherlock Holmes novels. I wanted to sort of put the needle back in the groove where I thought it belonged, more like Doyle. And I was intrigued by the relationship between Holmes and Freud. My father was a shrink, and my dad, and people would say to me in high school, they said, "Oh, your old man's a shrink. Is he a Freudian?" And I didn't know. So I said, "Pop, are you a Freudian?" And he said, "Well, it's a silly question." I said, "Why is it a silly question?" He said, "Because it's no more possible to discuss the history of the psychoanalysis and not start with Freud than it is to discuss the history of America without starting, if you're talking about Europeans, with the Vikings or Columbus. But to suppose nothing has happened since then is pretty dogmatic, pretty doctrinaire. When a patient comes to see me, I listen to what they say. I listen to how they say it. I'm very interested in what they don't say. I'm looking for, are they on time? What are they wearing? What's their body language? I am, in short, searching for clues from them as to why they are not happy. And I said, "Gee, that sounds like detective work, what you do." And he said, "Well, it is like detective." And then I suddenly realized that my dad always reminded me of Sherlock Holmes. And then I found myself wondering, well, how much did Arthur Conan Doyle know about the life and writing of Sigmund Freud? And this is like, how old I am, 15, by the 14. And I say, "Oh, they're both doctors." That's interesting. They both died within 9 years of each other in the same town. And both were involved one way or another with cocaine. Freud was a user until he gave it up, and Holmes as a character is a user, even though Holmes fans like to pretend that Holmes was just kidding Watson. But I think they get upset with that because a lot of people, and this doesn't just refer to Holmes, confuse heroes with gods. We want our heroes to be perfect, um, but heroes aren't perfect. And when people say, but you showed Holmes as a cocaine addict, how could you do that? And I said, first of all, Doyle did it first. But secondly, and more importantly, you shouldn't worry about it. If a man leaps into a raging torrent to save a small child, we can agree that he performs a heroic act. But if the same man leaps into the same river to save the same drowning kid and does it with a ball and chain attached to his leg, is he more of a hero or less? I would argue more. The fact that Holmes is able to function despite his addiction increases his heroism as well as his frailty to my way of thinking. So that's the answer to how I wrote the 7% solution. The second part of your question is, how do I feel the book compares to the film? Artists are not the best judges of their own work. They lose all proprietary authority over their creations when they're finished. They're out in the world. People are going to make of them what they will. I am very fond of both the book and the movie. They are different. I tried to solve problems in the film that I thought I had not really solved in the book. I regarded it as another chance to get it right. Um, so that's the sort of answer to that. I think they both hold up really well. And that's something that pleases me, is to create things that last.
I like that. A lot of food for thought here, Nicholas, about heroes and gods, about Holmes and Freud, addiction. Oh, fascinating, fascinating. There's a lot to think about here, a lot of meat to chew through. Margaret would like to know: have you ever been to any Sherlockian conferences? How was the vibe?
Well, you meet a lot of kooky people like you, that's for sure. Um, when I originally wrote the 7% solution, and when I found out it was going to be published, I dreamt of being invited to join the Baker Street Irregulars, which is the oldest and most prestigious Sherlock Holmes society in America. It was founded in 1934 by Edgar Smith, who was then the president of General Motors. And they've always had a lot of highfalutin judges and captains of industry. And FDR was a big Sherlock Holmes fan, and his headquarters during World War II was known as Baker Street. Um, so you meet a lot of people, delightful people, I might add, who are in some ways just like you. It doesn't mean that you are delightful too, um, but you're sort of, you share an enthusiasm. Incidentally, there are Sherlock Holmes societies in every city on the globe. There are two in Tokyo alone. So there's plenty. You can find a Sherlock. Just go online. You'll find them, and they'll have you join up in no time. You can go to those conferences, and you can find out exactly what fun or not, in your opinion, they are.
This is brand new information. I did not know this. Margaret Pinard, have you been to a Sherlockian conference? What did you think the vibe was? And why am I picturing you in period costume? Let us know in the comments. Nicholas, let's talk about your research for this book. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I missed one more comment from Margaret. She's saying, interesting. Have you included or done away with the Englishman abroad stereotypes? Cool question. Margaret also writes English and Scottish historical fiction. So we're getting the authorial questions here. I love it. Nicholas, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a tough question because I'm not sure what the Englishman abroad stereotypes are and how significantly they differ from the reality. There was certainly
Hmm.
The British Empire upon which the sun never sets, and all their colonial interests and dressing in tuxedos for dinner in the jungle. I think there is a certain amount of truth to those original stereotypes. The history of Englishmen in foreign places, and perhaps it's always the history of anybody in foreign places, brings out a queasy sort of xenophobic or xenophiliac uh, percentage in people, how much they blend in, how much they don't blend in, how much they condescend, how much they don't condescend. I directed a movie for Merchant Ivory years ago, The Deceivers, based on the John Masters novel, with Pierce Brosnan in India. And India is an experience and a half. Um, and I got there, and I think I started off as kind of another ugly American, wondering why this and that thing didn't work, um, and why it was easier to phone from New Delhi to Los Angeles than it was from New Delhi to Mumbai, and why can't you're the biggest democracy in the world? Why can't you have a telephone system? And somebody said to me, because we have more urgent problems feeding people. Uh, and that kind of brought me up short and confronted me, I guess, with my own stereotype. I forgot your question, but that's the best answer I can give you.
Her question was, have you included or done away with Englishmen abroad stereotypes?
Well, the answer is I think I've included them, and because they were period appropriate. Uh, that this is how I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Lawrence of Arabia, but if you haven't, you should. And there's a scene where Lawrence manages to get back with one of his Arab proteges, assistants, helpers. They've crossed Sinai. They've made it to the Suez Canal. They finally get back into Cairo, having taken Aqaba, which no one thought was possible. This is World War One. And he walks into the officers' mess with his Arab friend. And they go up to the bar and they say, "We would like a lemonade." And the bartender, who is Egyptian, goes, "No, no, 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 no. You cannot bring him in here. You cannot bring him in here." And Lawrence grabs him and says, "We want some lemonade." And later on, when everybody finds out, what he's done, this remarkable military exploit, he's celebrated, but not before they, look at them coming in their native dress, and somebody says, "And where do you think you're going, Mustafa?" So I think my depiction is appropriate to the time and place. Mine's 1911, and Lawrence is 1917. So I don't think I'm so far off.
Margaret's clarifying. She said, yes, I'm thinking of A Passage to India as the pinnacle of the model.
Yes, well, but this is A Passage to India. The model is atrocious. And it's about, this is time and period place. It's not appropriate now, and it may not have even been appropriate then, but that's how it worked.
Yeah, I traveled to India in 2011, and it is a very unique place, and it does, present its own your own challenges of being there. And like all travel abroad, makes you reckon with your identity as an American and your place in the world as such, and also out in the world, and the humility of that. I highly recommend international travel for everyone.
I think that's where we're different now than when the English people that we're talking about, or the French people, whatever. I think there was all this colonial condescension and patronizing that we're a little more evolved now. You can't just go places and look down your nose at everybody else because they don't have what you consider to be your advantages.
Exactly. And I think that going and being in those places and being the one who doesn't speak that language and who is the who is other, who is different, is very good for the spirit and very good for the psyche and very good for the ego. Um, very important, I think. Um, Nicholas, your fellow New Yorker turned LA dweller, Michael Elias, gave this a rave blurb saying Meyer keeps. Oh my goodness, this is such a rave. We are fortunate indeed that Nicholas Meyer keeps Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson alive and well and writes them better than anybody else. Set in Egypt 1910, in his witty and thoroughly delightful Return of the Pharaoh, the pair confront tomb robbers and treacherous English aristocrats in Cairo, Luxor, and the Valley of the Kings. This latest escapade is as tight and suspenseful as any contemporary thriller. Let's take that piece by piece. Michael was on the show when his book came out last year.
You can go home now. That's
You
the
Can
name
Go
of
Home Now. Excellent book. He's also a screenwriter, going back and forth between screenwriting and novel writing. So you two have that in common. So let's take this piece by piece. Witty and thoroughly delightful. How does one attain wittiness on the page? What's the key? What from a craft perspective?
I want to say some are born witty, some have wittiness, and some have wittiness thrust upon them. I if I am witty, and I'm not sure I'm conceding this, but one of the advantages of being a writer is you have time to think up being witty as opposed to real life. You know, there's a French expression, esprit d'escalier. Esprit d'escalier, there's no English equivalent. It literally means the inspiration of the staircase, meaning you've left the dinner party and you're on your way downstairs when you think of the clever comeback that you should have said at the time, but you didn't. And the advantage of being a writer is you have time to come up with the esprit d'escalier at the time, whether you're writing dialogue for a movie or writing in a novel. You can be as funny and take all the time to figure that stuff out. So that's my first part of your answer. I don't remember the rest of the question, but that's the.
Well, you know what? Actually, more questions are pouring in about this, so let's get over to those. Margaret would like to know: do you think Sherlock Holmes ever had l'esprit d'escalier? I don't speak. My French is terrible, so mea culpa.
L'esprit d'escalier. He sometimes, after the fact, will say to Watson, "You're talking to the biggest fool in Christendom or the biggest idiot in England," because it's not the wit that he didn't necessarily come up with, but it's the solution to something at the time that he was late. He is observed on one occasion, and probably more than one, that a string of inferences based on facts that seemingly lead to an inevitable conclusion with only the slightest alteration can point to exactly the opposite solution. So there's a famous adventure called The Yellow Face, in which Sherlock Holmes is wrong, and he added up everything, and he comes to the wrong conclusion. It's not exactly esprit d'escalier, but it is like, whoa. And there is in The Return of the Pharaoh, there's such a moment where Holmes says to Watson, "Oh, I'm completely an idiot. I missed this, and it was staring me in the face." That's about as close as it comes to esprit d'escalier.
Mark would like to know, how much research did you do for the Egyptian setting? So let's start there. This is a two-part question, but let's start there. Let's talk about your research into the Egyptian 1910 setting. Walk us through that, Nicholas.
Well, it's actually two periods of Egypt, because it's also the 18th Pharaonic dynasty, which is the dynasty of Akhenaten, who figures largely in the story, and his elder brother, who theoretically was in line for the throne first. So doing research, whether it's for a screenplay or a novel, or even anything nonfiction. It's a bit like going into what I imagine going to medical school is about. You're really starting from scratch, and you don't know much. What I knew about Egyptian history was from watching all those spear and sandal movies, and watching them build the Great Pyramid, which I loved, with Joan Collins. How could it miss? And then starting to read a lot about Howard Carter and the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. And I was interested in archaeology. I think when you're a kid, it's easy to kind of glom on to that. And I think the first screenplay that I ever wrote was about the life of Heinrich Schliemann, who was the discoverer of Troy. And he was the father of archaeology. He was not a very good archaeologist. He was sort of a slob and a plunderer. But I think his claim to distinction is that he was the first person, or among the first people, who thought that maybe legends somehow had their origins in fact, and that if you thought about this Homer stuff, maybe there was something to it. So I did a lot of reading, and at the end of The Return of the Pharaoh, there is a kind of bibliography where I cite a whole bunch of the books that I read, and there were, as I say, two periods. There's ancient Egyptian history, and there's turn of the 20th century Egyptian history, which has to do with the building and the aftermath of the building of the Suez Canal, the fact that the Ottoman Empire, otherwise known as the Turkish Empire, controlled a large portion of Egypt at this time, and also the British, who were very involved with their own colonial interests, which included the Suez Canal, which they somehow managed to acquire after the French had built it. Ferdinand de Lesseps, who, he didn't build it, he was an entrepreneur, he raised the money for it. So those competing interests, I did a lot of reading, and I listed most of my reading at the back of the book. So that's, and are there dangers of putting too much history into a historical mystery? Yes, in fact, at the very beginning of The Return of the Pharaoh, when Holmes tells Watson, you really ought to write this down because it's such an amazing story. But he says, and go light on the scenery. There's plenty to go around. And so Watson tries to go light on the scenery. But of course I didn't, because I was in Egypt in 1979. I did go
Uh-huh.
in, I did go inside the Great Pyramid. You can only go in through the robber's entrance. And this is not for the claustrophobic, is all I can tell you. There's no turning around. There's no backing down because there are people behind you. Um, so it's a kind of a hair-raising experience, and I guess I didn't know that was going to be research, but it turned out to be.
Wow. Yeah, I am claustrophobic, but I would like to get in there. So that's going to be a tough one for me. Mark would like
Big
to,
part.
yeah, I'll have to meditate a lot before I go in to get myself in a calm state. Mark would like to know, what are the dangers of putting too much history into a historical novel? What were you worried about that part of it?
Well, turning it into a travel log. Uh, I don't. It's funny. There are people who love reading travel books, and I guess I'm not one of them. I can't read that kind of book. Maybe I can't read any kind of book unless it's connected to a story, unless I am turning the pages to find out what happens next to the people. On the other hand, when you put Holmes in Paris, or you put him in Vienna, or you put him in Russia, you put him in Egypt, you owe the reader some sense of ambiance and place. So it's a delicate balancing act, because if you put in too little, the story feels unconvincing. And if you put in too much, it becomes the kind of travel book that people like me don't read.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you, Mark, for the excellent questions. Leslie, watching from YouTube, would like to know, how do you decide whether or not to incorporate factual characters into the novel? Cool question, Leslie.
Well, I, the idea of having Holmes interact with other characters, factual or fictional. In the 7% Solution, he meets Rudolf Rassendyll, whom some of your readers or listeners may know is the hero of The Prisoner of Zenda. He's a fictional character, but he's another he's a he's another personage from another book. Um, I don't think I premeditated it with Freud. That was the inevitable conceit of the novel. This is about a man being lured into Vienna to undergo a cocaine cure from a man who was then offering them. When the book came out, it was compared to Ragtime, which came out at the same time, and people said, "Oh, look what a brilliant idea, having fictional people meet non-fictional people." And I thought, but surely Walter Scott did this years ago. I'm not. I can't be the first. I know that isn't true. Um, when I put Holmes in Egypt, I wasn't looking to have him meet historical people, except Howard Carter. I knew that that was inevitable because Carter was at the time one of the leading uh, archaeological explorers. He was sponsored by Lord Carnarvon, and he did this for years, and he worked for the Department of Antiquities before he got fired from them for quarreling with a bunch of French tourists. And so he seemed kind of inevitable, but I didn't look for other Egyptian or British or Turkish real people to include. He just seemed like he belonged there, and that was how I decided.
Okay, cool. Leslie, thank you for the great question. Nicholas, thanks for giving us a peek into your research process and also the editorial decisions, who to include, who not to include. Very interesting. And we do see that in different books, and it is something to consider. So thank you for that. Another fabulous review that you received, Nicholas, is from Dennis Palumbo, who raved, "Once again, Meyer has brought Holmes and Watson vividly back to life. This time, thanks for the hearts up, you guys, on Facebook. Appreciate that. This time, pitting them against an array of dangerous characters in a colorful, well-researched Egypt during the Edwardian era. A great read. Congratulations on that from Dennis Palumbo." And he is not the only one enjoying this. Paul Giamatti, the actor, says, "I have loved Nicholas Meyer's Holmes novels since boyhood, and his latest takes me right back there. A dazzling blend of perfect period detail, Egyptology, murder, spies, treasure, mummies, spot on Holmesian banter, and one of the best action sequences I've read in a long time. Makes for another incredibly satisfying read." Fantastic review there from Paul Giamatti. Absolutely amazing to read. Nicholas, let's talk about the construction of an action sequence. What do you, from a craft perspective, think is the key to creating an action sequence that gets that kind of rave review from Paul Giamatti?
That's a surprisingly tough question. I suppose to some degree, my background and experience as a screenwriter plays a role in this. But basically, it's a question of sort of asking yourself what you want to see next, or what is happening in as Hamlet says, in my mind's eye. Um, I decided, I think the big action sequence in the Return of the Pharaoh, it turns out to be a sandstorm, a gigantic sandstorm, a killer sandstorm. And so I did a lot of research on sandstorms and what's their, what, where they have different names, and in different parts of the world, whether talking about typhoons or hurricanes or Scirocco's, and so on. And then where because I thought, well, you're in Egypt, you have to have a sandstorm. Um, maybe this did not occur to anybody else, but I thought you have to have a sandstorm. Anyway, then I thought, well, where does the sandstorm happen? And I decided on a certain place. I don't want to do too many spoilers here, but I decided on a certain set of circumstances. And then I thought, okay, how would the characters in these circumstances experience this? When, what time of day is it? Where are they? What are they doing? Um, and some of them are native Egyptians. They may know what's going on. Some of them are the characters who are like Holmes and Watson, who are not native Egyptians, and they will have to learn what's going on. And what's the first thing that happens? And what's the next thing? So you have to build it like scenes from a movie. Where do you want to go next? Close up of Holmes, wide angle shot of the storm, and so forth. And that's sort of how you construct it. It's easier to construct, in a way, an action sequence than it is to construct a mystery story where you have to work backwards and figure out a lot of things. Whereas an action sequence, you say, okay, they're going to blow up the bridge on the River Kwai. How are they going to do this? They have to get to the bridge. No one can see them. They're going to have to plant explosives under the bridge. They'll wait for night, and so on and so on and so forth. That's easier than figuring out how and when to justify that the butler did it.
Interesting. How would you say that your career as a screenwriter, whether it's Star Trek, working on Star Trek, working on other movies, and your career as a novelist, as a Holmes and Watson expert, keeper of the flame, how have they both enriched each other, and how have they been completely different and unrelatable?
Well, let me begin by saying that directing a film is a very different activity than writing, whether you're writing a screenplay or you're writing a book. Directing a film is a group activity. It's a familial project. It's a collaborative project. It helps if you like people. It probably doesn't help if you don't like them. You want to work with them. And it's an enriching but exhausting experience. You're under a time pressure. People are always looking at their watches. There are a million variables of temperature and temperament, of budget, of ego, of a million things. And at the end of it, speaking for myself, I'm partied out. I just want to go hibernate someplace. So then you go someplace and write. And whether you're writing a screenplay or whether you're writing a novel, it's just you. And unless you're collaborating with someone, but basically it's me. And you're only limited by your abilities. And unless it's a screenplay that has to be delivered, on a certain timetable, if it's certainly a novel, and even those sometimes have timetables, you set your own pace and you please yourself. But by the end of that, you may have cabin fever. You may long to just see other people. And one of the things about The Return of the Pharaoh that was interesting to me anyway is that it was written during the COVID experience. And so while other people were suffering and suffering badly, suffering mortally, I just stayed home and spent time in Egypt. Uh, and time went by, and it was a rather painless experience. I think one of the things I like about writing Sherlock Holmes stories is, and maybe for other people reading them, it's a kind of an escape. It's a great escape. We live in a terrifying world where drought and war and famine and anti-vaxxers and I don't know what all else. We're all seem to be sort of the planet hanging by a thread. And maybe what art can do, and it doesn't have to be heavyweight art, it can be just like what I do, is it gives you some time off. It gives you 2 hours to watch a movie, catch your breath, have some popcorn, and get ready to, do battle with reality again. And if my books can help do that, certainly they helped me do it. And I
Mm.
think, well, that's my justification as well as my recreation.
Oh, I love that, Nicholas. I always ask my guests, what do you want people to leave having the experience of having been in your pages with? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to experience? And I think an escape from an otherwise terrifying world is a perfect thing, because those of us who are living in this world and paying attention are indeed terrified. There's a lot of anxiety out there right now, a lot of frustration, a lot of uncertainty. It is a fearful time, and that is, it is how I experience reading. It is that chance to escape, and it's a chance to feel safe, because I know that this mystery is probably going to get solved. Everything's going to be mostly okay. And I want that certainty and that surety on these pages when I cannot get it on the street. I cannot get
Let's
it in
but
this
take your
room.
take your argument, your notion one step further.
Yeah.
That why do people love detective stories? Because you said it. Um, Detective stories, it's a paradox because they deliver exactly the opposite of what they promise.
Yeah.
They promise thrills and chills and things that go bump in the night, and the
Mm.
body is lying at an unnatural angle, and the head is bashed in by a blunt instrument wielded by a person or persons unknown. This could be really bad. And
Yeah.
yet, we like to curl up with a good mystery. We like to take this stuff to bed with us. And
Yes.
what more intimate conjunction can you imagine? But it's obviously because, although they may tell you that they're aspiring to replicate real life, that's not exactly what they're doing. They are serving up a version of life in which things make sense. In real life, things don't make sense. You get cancer, you don't know why. You get hit by a car, you don't know why. Things happen randomly. You get, you win the lottery. You don't know why. Life is a random proposition, but as the detective frequently says, it all adds up. In mystery stories, it all adds up. And that's a
Mm.
comforting rearrangement of reality. And I think it's one of the pleasures of detective fiction. It's not the only, there are books that are aspire to more than that. Um, Leo Tolstoy said that the purpose of art is to teach you to love life.
Ooh.
But and that's perhaps its most exalted purpose. When you read War and Peace, which is my favorite book, that's what I take away is all of life between two covers in all its everything. But
Mm.
I'm traversing a less exalted roof. I don't know whether I'm teaching people to love life or helping them to escape it.
Mm. I love that, Nicholas. I love that. Definitely food for thought here. And what a perfect note to end on, as I see we are out of time. Thank you so much for coming on. Oh, Mark is saying interesting form of mystery. You have to take the audience by the hand and you lead them in the wrong direction. They trust you and you betray them. All in the name of surprise. This is a rehearsal for murder. Mark, perfect comment. Thank you so much. Nicholas, this has been such a fun and fascinating, thought provoking conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I want to remind everyone to grab their copy of Return of the Pharaoh and support a woman owned independent bookstore. Remember, every time you swipe your credit card, you are voting for the world you want to see in, the stores you want to see survive, the authors you want to see on the shelves, the books you want to see succeed. So vote like you mean it and grab your copy tonight. I'm popping the link in the comments again. Mark is saying thank you so much for the interview. Alan saying thank you. Sarah, great to have you. Roberta, thanks for joining us. Maggie, great to have you. Stephanie, Avi, thank you for joining us and making sure I didn't miss anybody. Rebecca, thank you. Elaine, everyone. Bridget, Sally, so great to have you. Donna, Scott, thank you for being here. Everybody, Karen, great to see you. Shelly, Andy, making sure. Emily, thank you. Andrea, Christopher, Beverly, Kathy, Joanne, Shelly, Carol, wonderful to have you all. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you. Alan Nunnally saying thank you very much. Alan, great to have you as always. Nicholas, please come back when your next book is out. We'd love to chat further. And Mystery and Thriller fans,
be so lucky. Thank you. Thank you.
I have faith in you, Nicholas. You can do it. And Mystery and Thriller fans, I will see you tomorrow where for Lana Wood, who is revealing her investigation into the mysterious death of her sister, the actress Natalie Wood. That is happening live tomorrow at 7 p.m. Speaking of Hollywood, your neck of the woods there, Nicholas. So be here, same place, same time tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Central. Lana Wood dishes it all. Old Hollywood and the mysterious death of her sister. Have a great night, everyone, and I will see you tomorrow night.